On the 24th of July 1148, the Crusader army arrived on the outskirts of Damascus. Upon hearing that the main Muslim defences were concentrated around the bridge at Barada, they moved through the main road to meet the enemy at the crossing. The French and Jerusalem hosts formed their lines along the river, hoping to repel the Damascene troops that were now readying for battle. The final confrontation was at hand. Welcome to our video on the Siege of Damascus, the battle that would determine the fate of the Second Crusade. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. On the 19th of March 1148, King Louis VII of France and his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine had finally landed in Saint-Simeon harbour. Prepared for the Crusaders' arrival, the Prince of Antioch, Raymond of Poitiers, received the French pilgrims with great splendour, inviting them to his capital. Meanwhile, the remaining part of Louis's army had successfully managed to enter the Principality of Antioch through the Cilician land route, rejoining with Louis in Antioch. Though his army had been battered on its journey through Anatolia, it was still a large enough force to shift the balance of power in the Levant. Having now reached the lands of the Outremer, King Louis was faced with a difficult choice. Because the papal call for the Second Crusade did not specifically mention the recovery of Edessa, it was up to the European king to decide where to aid the Eastern Franks. This resulted in each Latin state competing for the Crusaders' assistance in order to expand their own territories. Unsurprisingly, it didn't take long before the Prince of Antioch asked Louis for help, imploring the French Crusaders to support him in his plans to conquer Aleppo and Shaizar from Nur ad-Din. Sadly for Raymond, Louis VII had another vision for the Crusade, deciding to visit Jerusalem and see the Holy Sepulchre instead. However, before he could depart, Louis's plan was opposed by Queen Eleanor. Through the use of his family ties to Aquitaine, Raymond had convinced Eleanor that an alliance with Antioch and the capture of 2 strategic citadels might neutralize the Zengid threat, and more importantly, stabilize the Syrian frontier after the loss of Edessa. These opposing visions for the Crusade were also fueled by personal differences between Louis and Eleanor. Louis was known for his piety and emotional distance, while Eleanor was known as an open, hot-tempered and energetic woman. Finding it easier to communicate with Raymond than with her own husband, Eleanor began to distance herself from Louis, spending time with the Prince of Antioch instead. Before long, Eleanor's disobedience and Raymond's influence over his wife started to anger Louis. As a result, rumours began to circulate about a passionate romance between the Queen and the Prince, only souring the relations between the French royal couple. The tensions between Louis and Aquitaine's supposed lovers were only exacerbated when the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Fulca, arrived in Antioch, urging Louis to visit Jerusalem. Fulca also informed Louis that German King Conrad III just landed in Acre the previous week and was already on his way to the Holy City. Not wanting to feel left behind, Louis decided to move south, leaving Raymond on his own and Antioch to fend for itself. Eleanor, however, refused to leave, insisting that her husband stay in Antioch under the threat of divorce. It was only by force that the French king dragged the Queen alongside him, after which both sides became separate from one another, already preparing for divorce. Word of Eleanor's actions spread not only in the Outremer, but even in France, where the royal steward, Abbot Suger, insisted that both sides should hide their grudges for the sake of the expedition. But the damage had already been done, and it was only a matter of time before this quarrel would change the history of France forever. Louis's falling out with Eleanor weakened his pious image as a crusading monarch, with important retainers like Count Thierry of Flanders and Bishop Arnulf of Lisieux beginning to argue in favour of returning to Europe, citing how King Louis was yet again running out of money and supplies. Another problem arose while the French Crusaders were marching south. During the journey, the 45-year-old Count of Toulouse, Alfonso Jourdan, died under unexpected circumstances. This too was a major loss to the French morale, as Alfonso Jourdan was the grandson of Count Raymond IV, one of the First Crusade's most prominent leaders and the founder of the County of Tripoli. Alfonso's corpse was barely cold before his bastard son, Bertrand, accused Tripoli's current Count, Raymond II, of poisoning his father. Bertrand convinced many knights of Toulouse to demand justice for Alfonso Jourdan by overthrowing the Tripolitan Count. Bertrand's decision to avenge his stepfather led to a decline in discipline among the French host. To make matters worse, Raymond II saw Louis's unwillingness to restrain Bertrand and decided to withdraw Tripoli's support from the crusade. As the contingents of Flanders and Toulouse were among the largest in the French army, both of these instances only deteriorated Louis's position. While Louis struggled through Anatolia, Syria and Lebanon, the German king Conrad rested in Constantinople, where he made a full recovery from his wounds. Not wanting to lose an ally against King Roger II of Sicily, Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos gave King Conrad III all the necessary supplies, horses, and new military equipment he needed. The Emperor of the Romans even allowed Conrad to recruit a combination of European volunteers and Frankish mercenaries in Greek service to aid the Germans in their quest. Even more generously, Manuel used his fleet to transport the German Crusaders all the way to the Holy Land. Upon landing in Acre in the middle of April 1148, Conrad was greeted with great splendor, after which he moved to Jerusalem, being the first of the two kings to reach the Holy City. After being welcomed by Queen Melisande and King Baldwin III, the German king visited the holy sites and even turned the Temple on the Mount into his quarters. It is very likely that during his stay, he managed to promote and stylize himself as the Crusade's main leader. When King Louis arrived in Jerusalem, he was given the same royal greeting that his German counterpart had received. With both the French and Germans now having reached Jerusalem, the kings Conrad III, Louis VII and Baldwin III now had to decide on their next possible move. Naturally, this could not be done without acknowledging the need for cooperation between European rulers and the local expertise of the Latins from Jerusalem. Thus, on the 24th of June 1148, all the kings assembled at Palmyrae near Acre, after which a great council took place in which the future of the Outremer was discussed. During these talks, it became clear that none of the parties were interested in aiding the Crusader states in northern Syria. Having no obligation to recover Edessa, the council decided that the city was too devastated and remote to retake, basically condemning Jocelyn II and the remnants of Edessa County to failure. The Principality of Antioch was also put out of the picture for various reasons. Louis had personal motives to reject Raymond's plans of campaigning against Aleppo and Shaizar. The German king also did not intend to help Antioch's expansion, as it would inevitably motivate Raymond to free himself from Byzantine overlordship, which could ruin the German king's alliance with Constantinople. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, for its part, was more concerned with its own interests than the interests of the other Outremer states. As a result, only two potential targets remained: the Fatimid city of Ashkelon and the city of Damascus, the latter of which became the Crusade's new direction. Relying on Latins as their guides, the European kings were convinced and decided to head for Damascus. Their confidence in an easy siege was so enormous that the Crusaders didn't even prepare any siege equipment, which would later prove to be problematic. There was the unresolved issue of who Damascus would be handed to once the city was captured. While King Baldwin III had appointed his vassal, Guy Brisbard, Lord of Beirut, as the future ruler of the city, William of Tyre states that Kings Louis VII and Conrad III favoured Count Thierry of Flanders. Nonetheless, all the parties agreed to march on Damascus, and having assembled their hosts at Tiberias with the relic of the True Cross in the summer of 1148, the bolstered crusading army began its march through Banyas towards the city of Damascus. Soon, the ruler of Damascus, Mu'in ad-Din began to receive reports of a large Frankish army approaching his city. Knowing full well that the city wouldn't withstand such a large host on its own, he began to prepare Damascus's defenses and, more importantly, called for any possible reinforcements he could find. These included local Bedouin tribes and, most importantly, the Zengids. Saif ad-Din and Nur ad-Din received Anur's messages and began assembling their armies, prompting a jihad in defense of the once mighty Umayyad city. The Crusaders marched through Huran without encountering any resistance. Their numbers are debatable, but the most probable number is 50,000 troops in total. After a short journey, the armies of Christendom reached the town of Kiswa, just around 20 kilometers southwest of the city, where they made their first encampment. From there, the crusading army could see its target. The city of Damascus was prominent in the Muslim world. Despite this being the case, its city walls were not as strong as many might have believed. Instead, Damascus's main defenses were its suburbs, most notably its vast orchards around the city. Together, they formed a dense forest composed of narrow passes that would not suit a major army to cross, especially one not familiar with its surroundings. Among these orchards, the Damascenes had built rescue towers for farmers and potential strongpoints from which to mount resistance behind enemy troops. The southwestern road met with the Barada River, which supplied the city with water. On the 24th of July 1148, the Frankish army crossed the river directly to approach the city from its western side. Meanwhile, Anur urged caution from behind the walls of Damascus and ordered his citizens to wait for more reinforcements to arrive. This was met with anger from the Adath, the local Damascene militia, who didn't want their orchards to be destroyed. The Damascene force left the city and began to mount defenses on the northern riverbank, deploying horse archers, melee infantry, and even a few ballistae. The Frankish army arrived on Damascus's outskirts in a marching column, prepared to face the standard hit-and-run tactics of Turkic horsemen. King Baldwin led the vanguard, while King Louis commanded the center. The Germans placed themselves in the rearguard, in case they needed to counter any possible attacks from the enemy. When they heard that the main defenders concentrated around the bridge at Barada, they moved through the main road until they met the enemy at the crossing. The French and Jerusalem hosts formed their lines along the river and tried to charge through the bridge. A desperate melee ensued, but the Muslims' intense missile fire soon began driving back the Christian advance. Seeing this, King Conrad III sent his infantry to bolster the Crusader attack, while he led his knights to the upper tide of the river. There, he managed to find a moat small enough to slip over with his men, riding along the river to position himself on the enemy's right flank. Then, according to William of Tyre, Conrad ordered his knights to dismount and fight on foot, with just their shields and swords, which was reportedly their preferred style of fighting. So it was that the German knights charged down on the enemy's right flank. At first, the Damascenes put up heavy resistance. The Crusaders' two-sided charge began to lose momentum at some point, and it seemed that everything was lost. However, in the midst of the fighting, Conrad spotted a revered Damascene warrior and challenged him to single combat, from which the German king emerged victorious. This shifted morale heavily in the Crusaders' favor, forcing the Damascene militia to retreat behind the city walls. Though victorious in their first struggle, the Crusaders now had to focus on the proper siege. To that end, the Franks decided to build a second camp, which they surrounded with stakes gathered from orchard trees next to the western gate. Beaten down, the citizens of Damascus began to lose all hope and even attempted to build barricades inside the city. If Anur had not eased the tensions, the city might have surrendered to the Franks. Despite the successful initial phase of the siege, the crusading forces also encountered some problems. First of these were logistical issues caused by the locals using orchards as a staging ground for guerrilla warfare and hindering Latin supply lines and foraging parties. This factor only emboldened the citizens of Damascus, who began to sally out from the city with increasing frequency to make hit-and-run strikes on the besiegers. With more reinforcements still pouring into the city, the defenders' confidence grew with each passing day. Another issue stemmed from the growing pressure of Zengid aid. Without siege machinery, the Latins didn't possess the means to end the siege before these key allies of Damascus arrived. Indeed, it was soon reported that the Zengid brothers were already at Homs, just a week away from Damascus. Convinced that the arrival of Saif ad-Din and Nur ad-Din was imminent, the European kings sought a quick means for Damascus's capture. Both medieval sources and modern historians are conflicted on what happened next, but it is most likely that the Crusader kings followed the Levantine Franks' advice to move from the western to the eastern part of the suburbs, where the walls were thinner and the area was more wide open. However, after a brief reconnaissance made by the Bishop of Langres, it became clear that the place lacked any water supply. After tense discussions and growing pressure, the Christian army decided to move east around the city through the southern wall. Unfortunately for the three kings, problems began to arise as soon as the Latins left the camp. The passages through the southern orchards proved difficult, with some of the Frankish contingents falling for Damascene guerrilla tactics along the way. Those who managed to reach the eastern side of the city on the 27th of July soon realized that despite its weaker walls, the Damascene defenders didn't intend to back down from their relentless attack. Constant Muslim raids and water shortages quickly became the sad new reality for the Crusaders. This only intensified as the fear of the Zengids' imminent arrival resulted in quarrels between the Crusaders and the Latins. These quarrels were intensified when the French and German kings' plans to appoint Count Thierry of Flanders as the future ruler of Damascus were leaked. This displeased the Eastern Franks greatly and compelled the Jerusalem contingent to begin talks with Enur, negotiating with him to lift the siege in exchange for tribute. This in turn prompted the European kings to accuse the Outremer's of treachery. However, with the prospect of taking Damascus becoming more and more unrealistic, King Conrad announced the retreat to Jerusalem. Not wanting to be left out, Louis followed suit, leading to the entire Christian army's overall withdrawal. Enur promised to let the Christian armies leave Damascus unmolested. However, the ruler of Damascus didn't promise to leave them unscathed. Seljuk horsemen harassed the Christian army all the way to Tiberias, with many being cut down by the Muslims. The failure to capture Damascus proved to be fatal for the crusade. After the retreat, King Conrad attempted to regroup and attack Ashkelon. However, the mood was sour, and after no one else showed up for 8 days after the proposed date, King Conrad decided to leave the Kingdom of Jerusalem and begin the return journey by sea, landing in the Byzantine city of Thessaloniki, where he met Emperor Manuel, tightening their friendship and discussing plans to attack the unruly Kingdom of Sicily. Unlike Conrad, King Louis decided to stay in Jerusalem until Easter of 1149, before planning his departure. Angered by the Greeks and Eastern Franks, the French king decided to ask the Sicilian king Roger II for safe ship transport. Having travelled on separate ships, the French royal couple set sail from Acre, heading back for France. So it was that the Second Crusade in the Levant had come to a close, and every participant would have to face the consequences of his actions. But what happened during these ventures on the way back? We will cover those stories in our next video. To make sure you don't miss that, please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would not be possible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.